We, in addition to that, of course, to look after our own well-being as an open platform and all of that, we also have a dedicated pen test team. It's an outsourced partner who sort of looks at all of the releases that we're rolling out. Unless they certify, stuff doesn't go out. We are very serious about this. So, in fact, we're even going to start publishing the pen test report every month on our GitHub, right? So, here is a code, you can use it, and here is also the latest pen testing report, right? So, stuff like that.
I'm Steve Stonebreaker, and this is Ephemeral Security. Today we're joined by Sandeep Lahane, founder and CEO of Deepfence, a cloud workload protection tool. Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me.
Great. So the term cloud workload protection, what does that mean to you?
It means many things to, in fact, it's in that one category, Steve, you will see so many approaches, right? But broadly, if you have to look at what a typical sort of a use case or a customer is really looking for, somebody who has a budget and wants to solve n number of problems, and then when they seek out or look for cloud workload protection platforms, they're really looking at three to four things, is what I've sort of understood after speaking with so many customers. First thing is, of course, runtime protection, right? And that again has multiple things underneath it, which is, are we looking for host level protection, host level intrusion protection to be more specific, in file system and process level, integrity monitoring. Some of them, of course, go beyond that, look at traffic. That I think forms the crux of CWPP. There is also, of course, other bits, which is, vulnerability scanning at runtime, as well as, further left in the CI/CD cycle, which is scanning your container images or scanning your artifacts essentially as part of CI/CD, and really all the way down to production. So it's a pretty broad sort of a umbrella under which a lot of these sort of techniques fall. But I think most everybody thinks of CWPP as a runtime workload protection tool, really focused on attacks happening in production. Yeah.
Right. And so there's been a whole shift, I guess, for shift left, right?
Yeah.
Which is trying to secure stuff before it goes out the door. Or I've also seen CSPMs say, well, we don't need to look at the network. We don't need NetFlow because our sensors do that, right? And we have our sensors everywhere. It's like, well, you're assuming that your sensors are deployed everywhere and you're assuming that you're catching everything on before deployment. But really, once it goes to production, new vulnerabilities can pop up, or it's very possible that your team, all of your controls did not get put in place before stuff went out the door, right? In a lot of environments, a lot of people have the keys to the kingdom. They can just spin up stuff, right? So
Mhm.
you have a motto, and I really like it. It's shift left, but secure right. Can you talk about that?
Well, absolutely. In fact, you know what, Steve? It's a very interesting point you just made. CSPM, CWPP, CNAP, CIEM, it just doesn't end really, right? I mean, the number of sort of solutions, the problems that we sort of are looking to tackle within this broader cloud security space are just, more than a handful. And yes, there is a broader convergence that seems to be happening, under the umbrella of CNAP, wherein some of the CSPM functionality is coming together with other posture related bits, like looking at sensitive secrets lying with VMs, looking at trying to correlate the exposure that you detected with CSPM scanning and vulnerability scanning, and try to come up with attack paths and stuff like that. And the very next urgency is, what do you do with these attack paths, right? Which is where the CWPP comes in picture, to be able to really look deeper at exactly what's happening within the cloud, within those workloads, really. So, and then of course you have the CIEM, and entitlements and identities and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is right there as an adjacency. So it's a convergence for sure that's happening. I mean, there's no denying of that fact, that especially in mid-market we see these all the time, that the customers want broader unified platforms which have various features like this, added, served as a platform instead of point solution. So it's pretty interesting there. We'll look at this in two ways. One is, what are you doing with the compute? which is basically the CWPP traditionally been sort of looked at is, right, okay, I'm going to put a sensor on the VM and I'm going to look at all the action there at runtime, be it file system, processes, monitoring, network, what have you. That's one way to look at it. The other bit is, of course, the non-compute, posture, really. Hey, here is an S3 bucket, and that has certain permissions, and that's not good for you, really. So the convergence of all of these things, and I think it's very logical, that's happening. We cannot look at these things in silos anymore. I think that's what CNAP is, sort of evolving into. But the current breed of CNAP vendors, if you look at it really, right, it's mostly CSPM oriented, is what I think I would say. They are, especially with certain approaches, cloud API hooking, agentless and stuff. There is only so far you can go with actual runtime protection, right? I think that's where there is a space for deeper analysis, deeper observability, deeper protection, which is where we come in. You know,
Wait, so what is CNAP?
Cloud native application protection platforms. It's a term Gartner coined, I think, a year ago, broadly to show the convergence of CSPM and CWPP. But honestly, these are some features of CSPM and some features of CSPP bundled together, as CNAP is not equal to best of breed CWPP with plus best of breed CSPM. It's not so, at least at this point in time, right? Because of the approaches that are out there. So yeah, CNAP is that broader umbrella term Gartner coined to show this convergence.
Okay, I think I got it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Then what really intrigued me about Deepfence is the packet inspection and decryption. Would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, be it vulnerability management, be it as part of CI/CD, or be it at runtime, be it posture analysis, CSPM and such. All these are great starting points to figure out your posture, right? To figure out your attack surfaces, really, which is basically what could go wrong, right? And everybody needs it. These are, I think, super commoditized features. Absolutely, everybody needs to have these features, to figure out what could go wrong, figure out the attack surface. But beyond that, what do you do? What about defense in depth? Once you figured out what could go wrong and you've remediated whatever you could, what about the real sophisticated attacks? That's going to be the next step, of course, really, right? Once you've done all of these basic things, at some point in time, you're going to need deeper protection to protect you against advanced attacks. I mean, of all kinds, really. There are so many attack vectors, it's just innumerable, but you're going to need sophisticated attack detection and protection in real time for all of your crown jewels, right? And that's where we come in and saying that, hey, you have CSPM, you have this vulnerability management. Well, by the way, we ourselves have it, right? We also offer that as an open platform, which is going to have vulnerability management, secret scanning, CSPM, all of that. All the commodity features completely open and free for the community to use, get the basic posture done right. And then when they're ready for deeper detection, that's where we sort of commercialize, Steve, right? I'm sure we're going to talk more about this as we go forward. But from very first principles, how do I ensure I'm seeing enough across these different kinds of infrastructure modalities? I've got Kubernetes, I've got some serverless, I have some VMs, I might have multiple clouds tomorrow, and I've got all of these point solutions or a platform even which is telling me what could go wrong. Now, what do I do with this data, right? I cannot remediate everything. So, and of course, there is going to be new attack vectors coming in. How do I even see that I am being exploited, for example, or here is a vulnerability which is a ticking time bomb, somebody's going and sort of exploit it? What do I really even do to ensure that? That's where this deeper inspection comes in picture, Steve, which is really being able to look at what comes in, what goes out, and what changes for every container, every VM, every cluster across multiple clouds, right? If you can't see this, it might already be too late by the time you figured out that you've been attacked. For example, if you already see a malicious payload getting executed in, within one of your clusters on one of your hosts, for example, well, it might already be too late. You might already be compromised, right? So it all starts with building that deeper observability. And I think network is the source of truth. It was so historically in cloud too. It's a different kind of network. It requires different kind of solutions really, which is where we come in. We really look at it, somewhat more holistically, Steve. What we say is, look, with the posture analysis that you're doing with vulnerability scanning, go and figure out your attack surface. You know what? Even go beyond that and figure out all of the cloud attack pathways that might be existing because of all of these vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. But Beyond that, you're going to need something which is actually looking at, like I mentioned, what comes in, what goes out, and what changes. Steve, in observability, in performance monitoring, in APM, we have these four pillars: MELT, metrics, events, logs, and traces. Remember, in cyber, there is no such thing. I think the time has come to be able to say that I have the vulnerability scanning in place. I have the CSPM sorted out. I've got the basic protection, basic posture analysis ready. Now I'm looking for solutions or approaches which are basically going to form the three pillars or four pillars of my, you know, defense in depth. And those could be, like I said, start with your attack surface, pillar number one, which is your this commoditized feature set, and then you start looking at what comes in, that is ingress monitoring, what goes out, that is egress monitoring, and what changes, from file system changes to system call changes and all of this, and really put it all together across time and space, and then say, hey, you know what, that particular vulnerability, Spring 4 shell, I know that was in a package called so and so, because I know that I scanned it as part of CI/CD, I scanned it at runtime. I also know that package was loaded in memory by a process called P1, for example. And at runtime, I can see that process is having live connections, right? And on those connections, I can see a malicious payload coming in. And I've looked at it, even if it is over encrypted traffic, and then I've gone ahead and sealed off that attack path. I think this is the definition of comprehensive defense in depth, right? What lies beyond the basic posture analysis and basic attack surface measurement is this, right? So that's how we look at it, Steve. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the four pillars you talked about because when I'm doing like a forensic investigation
Mm-hmm.
and I can see that, let's say a server called out to a, a domain that we don't see that often and
Mm-hmm.
it pulled down some sort of payload, executed it, and then it deleted that file, right? But it deleted it in a way that it was overwritten and you can't recover it. So in that case, I might try to go pull that file down again. But depending on the attacker, that file might no longer be available, right? So in that
Yep.
case, I have no evidence at all to follow. I have no idea what the payload did, right? I can try to follow it depending on the tracing and stuff on the operating system. But ideally, I would have the full packet capture, right? And then
Yep.
I could pull that binary out of the packet capture. I could also see decrypted call that was able to deliver a payload to my system, right? And that's what's missing from what
Yep.
I'm seeing from current solutions on the market. Are you saying
Absolutely.
that your product would allow that?
Absolutely, Steve. You put it so right that that's exactly what is missing. We've got a lot of other kinds of tools and other kind of technologies, which are great, by the way, on their own. But the missing gap is this, right? You start with my attack surface, and then you look at this runtime three pillars, and then you come up with this. And oftentimes, what happens is you spoke about decrypted traffic. You're right. I mean, large amount of traffic is encrypted, especially in malicious traffic on outbound malicious traffic, command and control channels, often encrypted, right? Bad stuff is happening. You can see that this is going to an IP that has never been seen before, this connection, but you really can't see deeper because it's encrypted. And that's where we go a few steps even beyond what I just mentioned earlier, Steve, is let's build such a deep level of observability within the traffic that even those things, which is encrypted traffic, which is outbound communication channels over encrypted, outbound C2 communication over encrypted channels, we should be able to even look deeper in that. And this is not limited to HTTP only, right? This is going beyond HTTP. Of course, HTTPS, because we're looking at encrypted traffic as well. But let's also look at DNS. A lot of command and control traffic uses DNS even now, right? DNS over HTTP. Why not? Let's look at that too, right? So this goes beyond just the HTTP traffic. And then you mentioned that example really, right? You have, let's say, this particular vulnerability, Log4j. Today, you see an attack path. Tomorrow, you see there is a malicious request coming in over HTTP. You look at that, you can say JNDI LDAP there, for example. That's good enough. You're making progress. You're detecting a real attack now. But then suddenly nothing happens for 2 days, right? And then after 2 days, you see there is a malicious payload executing on the file system. And then again, for a week, nothing happens. And then a week after that, you start seeing a command and control traffic going out somewhere, basically exfiltrating. So these events might not be happening within that 30-minute window or 1 minute window, really, right? Or, this could be evolving over time and space. And we should be able to correlate these findings even across time and space, really, right? So I think that's where it all comes together. Just building deeper observability, just looking into encrypted traffic, sure, you see a lot more than you were seeing thus far. But unless you put it all together over a longer amount of time, you're not going to be able to detect everything. That's the intent, Steve. That's the gap. That's what we're really bringing to the market. Yes.
Great. And when I was looking at your sandbox, I noticed intent detection rules, and it appeared to be like chained MITRE attack rules. And it's kind of like every time you hit something in the MITRE attack framework, like a number increments, and you can have a special magic number, and then the alert fires, right? Like we saw X, Y, and Z. This is definitely indicative of an attack. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, of course, is users, practitioners are used to look at things, which is rightfully so, in terms of a kill chain or a MITRE attack, of course, more popularly now. So the initial attempt, I think every vendor should do, is to try and fit their findings, the TTPs really, right, into these frameworks so that users can see, okay, this is recon. Well, recon happens all the time. I might not care so much about it, but then, hey, this looks like it's exfiltration. And that is serious, really. Now, that something is really amiss here, and I need to be on it ASAP. So, mapping findings, mapping alerts, and mapping those to TTPs, that's a great thing. I think a lot of mature vendors do this. We do it as well. We go a step beyond there, Steve. What we realized is people need a way to control and consume this data and correlate these things on their own, purely based on the situation at hand. One example I'll tell you, right? In Log4j, it's been a few months now, but one of the things that sort of, well, we learned multiple things during that episode, really, for ourselves and for our customers as well. But one of the major things that came across is a customer would come and say, hey, my customers, that is that customer's customers, wanted them to prove or disprove that they have log4j, and if they have it, they had log4j. If it's either fixed, or if it is not fixed, it's not exploitable, for example, right? And if it's getting exploited because you're still patching, they needed to know ASAP. Otherwise, they wouldn't trust us. So these are very real world use cases. We hadn't seen these kind of use cases before, right? Because so that was very, very interesting. So one of the things that we learned there was, can a customer come in, can a user come in and write a rule which says, hey, if log4j vulnerability is there and there is a live attack path for that log4j, that's a live connection, and you also see a malicious payload coming over HTTP, if these three things happen in sequence, page, I want to be notified on pager duty, or I want the email to go to the whole security org, right? So, and this has nothing to do with MITRE so far. You see what I'm saying? This is about the correlating things based on the situation, the battles that they're fighting at that point in time, really, right? So it was pretty interesting. So yeah, the correlation is basically going to give users, empower them to consume these alerts the way they see fit. For example, user can come and say, you know what, you've taken me from 1,000 vulnerabilities to 10 attack paths. That's great. But hey, you know what? I don't even want to look at those 10 attack paths. Ping me on PagerDuty or send me a notification on Slack or Teams only if somebody's sending malicious payload on those attack paths. Otherwise, don't bother me. That's a very legitimate workflow, right? You can automate this, you can write these rules, and you'll be alerted only when some of these conditions are met together. And then you know that something malicious is really happening and you need to be on top of it. Yeah.
And is PagerDuty really? I mean, that you give that as an example, but I think I saw in the sandbox there was also options where I could quarantine a container or restart a container or do other things based on different things that are happening. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So yeah, that's a great question. A couple of ways to sort of, let me, probably my answer is going to be a little long winded on this, Steve. Bear with me. But once you've seen so deep, once you've looked into, this encrypted traffic and detected these things and you're mapping to TTPs or, have one of your correlation rules, what next? Detection is great. You've built observability, you've built deeper detection, but you also need somebody to come in and cut the pipe so that, the attack gets disrupted. And we do this at two levels. One, of course, is the traditional network level cutting the pipe, which is saying that, here is the connection on which malicious requests are coming in, cut that connection. It's not a proxy, by the way. It's not a proxy. It's not a kernel module. So even if, there is not going to be a single point of failure there, But
Wait,
we
so
deal with
hold on, you're
yeah.
saying you can drop it? So like if the you see the malicious JNDI request and it's going to a server that has a vulnerable version of log4j, you can have a rule that would then drop that. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, but not at a request level. We deal with things at connection level, which is different from proxies.
So if it gets dropped at the request level, would it still make it to the web server? Or I
So
guess you see it when it gets there.
yeah, it wouldn't make it to web server. It would
Okay.
not. Yeah, the proxies are
Oh.
real time. We are not real time. We are near real time, Steve. So it's not 100% in line, but we're dealing with connections. We are so maybe I should probably talk about how we do some of the stuff that we do. Really, right? Let me know if that's
Yeah,
something.
yeah, please, please.
Okay. So what we really do is so this whole packet filter is built on top of eBPF. It's completely built in Rust. What it does is it basically hooks into XDP if there is no XDP, or for egress it hooks into TC, right? And then essentially grabs a copy of traffic from there. XDP for ingress, TC for egress works. If XDP is not there, TC works for both. We grab the traffic from there. Now, this is some of the lowermost levels in the stack, networking stack, really, right, where we intercept traffic. And then this traffic, there is some heuristics that we apply. For example, most of the HTTP attacks you see, they are at the beginning of HTTP session. Based on that, we do some sampling if we need to. There is also a no sampling mode where we will not be sampling anything at all. And then what happens is all of this packets, all of this traffic that we captured comes to user space. That's where we do reassembly. What I mean by reassembly is we are really doing things like TCP reordering and then sort of building out the layer 7. If it's HTTP traffic, you get full HTTP sessions in user space that you can look deeper into. And then you can say things like this, well, this is HTTP, and apply all of the core rule sets for mod security to detect OS top 10. You can do that. If it's not HTTP and if it's DNS, for example, and we'll get to know that, then if you can apply DNS specific rules. You can even say things like this. Well, this is inbound. This is ingress. Apply only rules which make sense for incoming traffic. For example, the command and control rule you probably don't want to apply on inbound traffic, right? That's more for outbound traffic. So that's really what happens. So we use two kinds of rule sets. Of course, one is emerging threats, which is pretty standard. There is also mod security core rule set, which is very HTTP specific. You can also write a custom rule set. So things like process P1 is sending something to S3 bucket, and within that connection, if you see a string called XYZ, alert me. Or if you see a string which looks like database credential, session keys and stuff like that, let me know. So you can even go on to sort of write your custom rules, which will looked at. So all this is really Hyperscan, Rust, TC, XDP, pretty low level stuff. That's what happens, right? That's the core design of this. Now we've been doing pretty well. We can do 10,000 requests per second, Steve, without going beyond 5%, 6% in terms of CPU, and about 90 MB, 100 MB in terms of memory, right? We have had setups where customers are clocking close to 15,000 requests per second, stuff like that. So pretty optimized piece of software here, right? And it works because it's written in such a way. But and of course there is an encryption piece which comes in picture, right? So we use uprobes to grab traffic before it enters encryption stack. There are other ways to handle this, of course, like you can grab session keys from memory of running processes, but that approach has privacy concerns, so we don't do that. So we use the basically intercept traffic before it gets encrypted and after it gets decrypted, really, right? And then of course once you have all of this traffic and fully reconstructed, fully assembled, then you apply protocol specific rule sets, really. So that's the whole idea. And I know it's probably a little long-winded, Steve, but I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. It made me think
Hmm.
you were talking about seeing strings in the traffic, and I have a lot of experience with mod security, and that's pretty exciting that we can apply those rule sets. But you could have something like honey records or something, right, in your database, and you could have a rule that if this particular record is ever seen going outbound to raise the alarm because no one should ever be calling that customer record, right, or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's so exciting. This is definitely a game changer, and it also made me think in terms of like unknown attacks. And if you think about like Heartbleed,
Hmm.
there were some folks that had gone back through their TCP logs, and they saw the Heartbleed attack signature like 6 months before like the world found out about it, right? So in terms of like, I'll use a portmanteau here, a threat retrospective.
Hmm.
Is that something that a customer would have to do on their own? And just because I believe your product, you can store full packet capture, if you've enabled it off to S3. Is that something they have to do on their own to be able to run the signatures through it? Or they like replay it, or how would that work if you wanted to see once something like Heartbleed or whatever or shell or comes out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there are two to three parts here, Steve, the way we see this, right? The first part is, of course, being able to detect known knowns, really, right? The known signatures or regular expressions that you have, signatures or variants for. And that's easy part. Well, the only thing that we had to invent to make that more complete was to decrypt traffic, right? Or grab before it gets encrypted. So now you're applying the known rule sets to more traffic than you ever could. That's a win, right? I mean, you're seeing more, you're detecting more. That's number one. But this does not solve the problem of 0 days, for example, right? Here is an attack or here is something malicious and I don't have a signature or I don't have a rule. I don't have anything for it. How do I even detect it, really, right? So, and that's a real problem. Just seeing deeper doesn't help you detect some of these things. Sure, your probability goes up, but you need specific set of techniques. And that's where some of the machine learning comes in picture, Steve. So we fully know that anything which is rule based, no matter how efficient and fast, has its limitations, right? And in terms of both false negatives, false positives, and you will not detect unknown stuff and all of that stuff. So there is the second layer, which is basically machine learning layer. There are two to three parts of that too. One is a simple statistical anomaly detection, really, right? Things like I've never seen this particular process sending so much data out that itself looks suspicious to me. Or that it's suspicious, it cannot be malicious, right? What we really do is we try to detect some of these suspicious and anomalous things, and again weave them into a sort of a correlated alert, which has a higher chance of being malicious. You see what I'm saying? So one is, of course, the traffic coming in and going out. Oh, well, this looks like a data leak. Well, it looks like a data leak, but the chances of it being data leak are higher if there really was a vulnerability on that particular node or a misconfiguration that makes it more like so. You see what I'm saying? So machine learning on its own, it's very hard to say this is 100% accurate. It gets more accurate once you start adding other signals to it. For example, known vulnerabilities, known misconfiguration, known secrets, and stuff like that. And that's why I said there are four pillars to this. One is your known attack surface, and then what you do at runtime, which is what comes in, what goes out, and what changes. If you take out one of these pillars, you have an incomplete story, right? Because then something is going to give you false positives or you're going to miss something. So, broadly, yes, machine learning comes in as a second layer of detection. It's by its very nature, it's probabilistic on its own. If you just run that, you probably will end up with tons of alerts, right? So, we use that as a way to flag anomalous behavior and then filter it out further with the known attack surface that you have, and that takes things to the next level now. So from the state of the art, as you see, Steve, what we have done is we have started looking into more traffic without a proxy. We have started looking into even encrypted traffic. That's another win. Third thing, what we have done is we have applied these deeper rules and custom rules and all of that. That takes you a level beyond. And beyond all of this is basically adding that probabilistic layer, which says, well, if something is missing, despite all that you're doing so far, here is one more try to catch it, or here is one more attempt to find anomalous activities and see how they, sort of weave in with other things that you might be detecting. And then finally, at the end of all of this, Steve, and this is really a hard problem, I think. Accurate correlation is a hard problem. It's a holy grail, I think I would even go on to say that, is weaving all of this together with sufficient confidence. Some things are easy, some things are not so easy, and some things are impossible, right? I mean, can you say with 100% probability that 1, 2, 3, and 4 happen in a certain sequence and that's why this is an attack? Well, you can say it with probability. You cannot say with 100% confidence. But I think the 0 day detection is fraught with such issues. Our attempt to solve this problem in entirety really is layering these various techniques, Steve, on top of each other, starting with very fundamental deterministic techniques and layering some probabilistic techniques on top, and then really sort of trying to put it all together to get you that final causality, right? Or final correlation saying that this is an attack, this is a smoking gun because of so and so and so happening over so much amount of time.
Yeah, definitely. And from what I've seen, other vendors aren't doing that. And it's when you're doing forensics in the cloud, it's extremely frustrating
Yeah.
not to have the full packet capture. So I think that that's really exciting. And to be able to see base64 encoded payload, for example, like with Log4j or something like that, and to actually be able to see it in the packet, it's much more exciting than looking at it in the logs, right? Because if you can catch it, the sooner you catch it, the better, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Did you check out the latest? Well, it's been a month now, I think. Project that we launched called Packet Streamer, which basically, it's a simple TCP dump like tool, but basically makes some of these things possible, Steve, across cloud native environments, including AWS Fargate. So yes, now you can store all of this packets PCAP for months in S3 bucket. Do post facto analysis. You can detect attacks, as and when they are sort of revealed and stuff like that. Yeah. So a lot of that is possible now with some of this tooling that we have built.
That's really great.
Mhm.
I know we're looking at other solutions like with Fargate and stuff like that. Being able to do things like the full packet capture, you really have to like use proxies and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And it introduces
Yep.
like single points of failure, and then your bill goes up as well, and it's all kind of ridiculous. But
Yep.
being able to store the PCAPs in S3, I could definitely see leveraging some of the AWS native tools, right? Do raw searches over those PCAPs
Yep.
and search for certain things, and that could also be interesting.
Yeah. In fact, you know what? One of the I remember that one of the as soon as we launched that project, Packet Streamer, about a month ago, one of the users wanted to the whole S3 bucket and streaming it to Kafka, streaming it to Redis, and all of that really came based on what we heard from some of the users. One of the users wanted to do, Steve, was stream live traffic from across whole of his infrastructure into S3 bucket and then feed that in a somewhat live fashion to Zeek, and then run some of that Zeek based anomaly detection, really, right? So yeah, all of these use cases are now possible. Yep.
That's amazing. Yeah, using like Zeek or Corelight. So in the
Yep.
past, I was at a company and we really wanted to be able to look at all of our traffic across all of our instances and feed that to Corelight, which
Yep.
is the enterprise version of Zeek, right, or Pro.
Yep.
And our plan was kind of ridiculous. It was like we needed to add an extra network interface, right, to every single EC2 instance. And then we needed to have that extra network adapter replicate the traffic. And if you do that, then the total throughput of your instance it's halved, right? And there's just all these problems that you end up encountering if you really want to replicate the traffic.
Yeah.
So to hear that there's another way is
Yeah.
definitely exciting.
Yeah, and you know what, the AWS egress cost, right? And there is always that. If I mean, not only you are going to reduce the bandwidth by half, but if you're sending this traffic across regions, that's going to cost you a bomb, right? That's also there. But the simpler option, of course, is to ship it to S3 bucket, which is in the same region, and then you can work off of that later, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and if you use like endpoints too, right? Then you can send it to S3. You don't even have to go out to the public internet, right? If you were to use like a VPC endpoint or something like that too, so help
Yep.
reduce cost.
Yep.
Yeah, the statistical anomaly detection stuff sounds really interesting. I'm wondering, I don't know if you have some more examples for that. Like, I'm wondering if you think about statistical anomalies with things like path and things like that. So let's say the path is like, I don't know, slash API slash user or something like that. And generally you only see calls that are maybe 80 bytes long or something like that. And now you're seeing a call that's much larger than 80 bytes, like 200
Yep.
bytes long or something like that. Would that be a good example of it or?
Yep, yep, that certainly is an example for sure. I mean, you can look at all of these, the example that you mentioned, and above and beyond that, physical and structural anomalies really in the traffic that you've seen, the shape of your deployments, the shape of east-west communication that you figured out, all of that really. Some of these are more accurate than others, right? But then of course they have to be sort of scored accordingly, used as additional signals. None of these are sources of truth on their own. They become meaningful when you sort of put them into larger scheme of things, score them properly, and then say, okay, with this, the probability of this being a real, malicious action goes high, stuff like that. So yes, yeah,
Okay, what about an IP address that has made 200 known malicious calls, and then there's a call from that IP address, and it's not in one of your rule sets? Would that still be marked as more suspicious just because that IP address has made so many malicious calls within the past 5 minutes?
yes, yes, for sure. I mean, we also use as one of the other sort of more deterministic layer is list of known bad IPs. I mean, it's never constant; it always is changing on a daily basis, of course, right? But we use some open source threat intel. I'm happy to share those things with you, Steve, as we sort of keep chatting more and more. But I think it's on our GitHub, which we're going to open source also soon. Right now, it's closed source. The threat intel is completely closed source. We're going to open that up as well at some point. But yes, if these are known malicious IPs, by default, they are right up there, you know, in terms of maliciousness. So there is also going to be a button which basically says on a daily basis, take this list of IPs and just block them. I don't even want to receive any traffic from them because I know these IPs exist on 10 malicious lists, right? Like stuff like that. So that's totally possible. Yeah.
So what are you using to block that traffic? Is it like IP tables, or I don't know, how's that work?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And you know what? eBPF is awesome, but it's not everywhere. AWS Fargate, as we speak, doesn't have eBPF. Well, IP tables also won't work on AWS Fargate. The only way to block these things in certain environments is basically calling into underlying cloud APIs, right? In AWS Fargate, eBPF doesn't work. You cannot have IP table rules. You just cannot do any of the traditional stuff there. So you have to fall back to cloud APIs. In more traditional environments like VMs and all of that, you can fall back to, if you have eBPF, you can use eBPF. If you don't have that, you can fall back to IP tables. In cases where you have CNIs like Calico and Cilium and such, oftentimes they interact with IP tables, right? I mean, if you set up a rule, they come in and overwrite rules and vice versa. The cleanest solution in such cases is to tap into the underlying CNI APIs, right? Calling into CNI to block traffic. So what we really do is we first figure out where we're running, right? Is it Fargate? Is it VM? Is it Kubernetes? If it is Kubernetes, are we using any other CNIs? What is peculiar about that CNI and all of that stuff, really? So I really look at this as a two-part problem. One is detection, which is the brain, and the other one is these isolation or network policies, which is really the brawn, the muscle. And if you look at all of these environments have that muscle in some or other form. If there is nothing, and it's just a Linux VM, you have IP tables, right? Even if that Linux is 10 years old, you will still have that. Things get a little different for Fargate, of course, where there is nothing, none of this, except cloud APIs that you can call into, right? So, yeah. So this particular problem is, it has multiple sort of, nuances to it, purely based on what kind of environment you're running.
Got it. And then in terms of the forensic workflow, I know that if I was doing an investigation, I would want to see all file read writes, all process execution, etc. And from what I saw, out of the box, your product doesn't provide that to the end user. I think it might do that. I think it might be logging that like server side. Are you guys going to eventually be in that space where you provide the data to end users, or would you recommend that they implement something like Audit D or something like that to be able to collect that extra data if they want it?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, you know what? We're getting asked about this more and more, Steve. So the way we stream packets, the very obvious question is, hey, can you also stream me all of the interesting syscalls, right? Or all of the interesting actions that are happening on that particular node. We trace this. You might have seen in the product, we're looking for things like ptrace and, some of the system calls, which are sort of privileged, which suggest, that certain action with certain privileges is being done. We did not stream it at this point in time. We use it for detection, but I think it's a natural extension that we come up with something like that, an eBPF based tap, which basically lets user define what actions he or she wants to sort of store for future usage, right? Ship it to S3 bucket and then sort of run a post facto analysis on that. I can totally see that as doing that. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I feel like sometimes vendors they miss the mark in terms of being fully featured for the forensic analyst. And with CWPP, I feel like it's uniquely situated to provide that information. And
Yep.
since you guys are doing the packet capture, yeah, it makes sense to then provide the rest of the data.
Yep.
So going back to the workflow stuff, I found that really interesting that you can take action based on certain things, whether it's restarting a pod or quarantining it and things like that. And I'm just thinking in terms of like a forensic workflow, I think I would want to make sure that the packet capture is archived off. I have a snapshot of the container or pod. I keep it running in a quarantine environment. And it'd also be cool, I guess, probably you can figure this out on your own as a forensic analyst, but being able to compare the traffic you're seeing that you saw during the time period of the alert versus known good traffic, right? To kind of see what the diff is, that would certainly be interesting as well. What are you seeing from your customers for these kinds of workflows?
You mean baselining normal traffic and trying to find
I,
deviation?
I,
Mhm.
well, I think I mean more when, and I'm not sure if your customers talk to you about their forensic workflows or not, but I'm certainly interested in like how folks are using your products when, in terms of the workflow portion of it. Like, are they automatically quarantining stuff, and then are they kicking off a bunch of other things? Like I believe you said there's like people are using Bro and stuff like that, or Zeek. What are you seeing as from your customers?
Got it. Yeah, yeah. No, I would love to answer this in two parts, Steve. What we're really seeing is why our customers buy defense is pretty clear. It's because of the deeper runtime detection and protection, right, with the traffic analysis and all of that. That's the gap in the industry that we're filling in right now. While we have ambitions to be a broader platform in the future, right now that's the wedge that which we are sort of entering the market with deeper observability, deeper security, with all that we're doing with traffic. Number one, coming to how customers are really using is we've predominantly seen two kinds of workflows. Okay, and that I think has been a function of scale that customer has. And what I mean by that is, let me talk about a typical mid-market customer, which has, let's say, 1,000 EC2 instances, running Kubernetes 10 to 15 clusters. That's let's take that as one sort of a persona or a one bucket. And the other one is, let's say, somebody who has 5,000 nodes really, and dozens of clusters, Kubernetes clusters, and gigabytes of traffic going through their infrastructure per second. Just an example, really. We have one or two such very large sort of deployments, and their workflows are slightly different. While the core detection and protection piece remains same, how do they consume and how do they use a product varies significantly. On the mid-market side of things, you would see customers are happy hooking into Slack or getting a webhook set up, defining some correlation rules, and so that they know if attack path is live, and if traffic is coming on that attack path and it looks malicious, hit me up on Slack, right? Pretty straightforward workflow. It goes to the SecOps teams, InfoSec teams, they look at it, and then sort of they go from there. There's a Jira ticket that you can file from the product itself. Even all those things happen. So for different kind of sort of workflows for different teams, not everybody's using the same sort of tooling really, right? But all of the popular tooling that we see ops team use, we have support for that, or most of it at least. That's one flow really, right? Hooking them into their SIM, sending everything to their Splunk or Sumo Logic. We see a lot of Sumo Logic in mid market, and some of the other ones we use GCP. We've integrated with Chronicle and all of that. So basically, they have all of this tooling, and they sort of ship alerts and vulnerabilities, everything into their ops tooling and their SIM and SOAR tooling, and then sort of go forward from there. That's one very straightforward use case. At a limited scale, we have seen, or a medium kind of a scale. What I have seen at very large deployments is slightly different. While they have all of these ops tooling, they're never going to come and look at the GUI. They're never going to come and look at the dashboard. For them, what we have, Steve, is we have what is called as a streaming, security apparatus. So the whole API that drives our GUI, our dashboard, is exposed to the user as it is. Okay, and you can stream your entire infrastructure over a WebSocket. And what I mean by that is, think about it this way: you're listening on a WebSocket, a new container comes up, you get that as a delta. A new VM comes up, a new connection gets established, you get that as a delta. And you can operate on these deltas. One use case here is example, hey, new container came up, scan it for vulnerabilities. If it has more than 5 vulnerabilities, decommission it, right? Or new container came up, it has one vulnerability, but I can't decommission it. I must let it run. But if you start capturing traffic, start doing deeper analysis, if you see more than 5 critical alerts, then take it down. You see what I'm saying? All of this can be completely automated. And we have, Python and Golang clients written, which basically let you stream whole of your cloud infrastructure, right? And then as and when the deltas start coming to you, you start acting upon them and then sort of go from there, right? So that's broadly the idea. At large scale, nobody wants to look at one more dashboard. They want to automate things. Automation of protection policies usually doesn't happen very quickly because people want to sort of develop more confidence. They want to see what is the quality, efficacy of your alerts, and then they are more sort of more encouraged to, or more comfortable to sort of go there to automate even protection policies. But roughly, automation is a big deal at scale, and that's what we're seeing. Yep.
Interesting. That's really cool.
Thank you.
So, how do you guys test your product? I noticed in the sandbox you guys had some like Log4j and like Spring4 Shell, but do you guys test it with like a battery of different known exploits, or what's that look like?
Yeah, no, it's all of the above, really. I mean, for example, very recently we started playing with BPF Door, the first branded eBPF malware. Did you take a look at that? That's pretty cool. There is the usual, the Zardos and the Mirais of the world that we keep sort of playing with against. We have our own sandbox within AWS, which we use to sort of detonate some of these exploits, see what we're detecting, what we're missing, and how can we sort of be better at detecting and stuff like that. So yes, so there is the very popular malware family, the very popular exploits and vulnerabilities that we always keep sort of detonating and start comparing how we're detecting vis-a-vis how someone else would detect and stuff like that. That always happens. We, in addition to that, of course, to look after our own well-being as an open platform and all of that, we also have a dedicated pen test team. It's an outsourced partner who sort of looks at all of the releases that we're rolling out. Unless they certify, stuff doesn't go out. We are very serious about this. So, in fact, we're even going to start publishing the pen test report every month on our GitHub, right? So, here is a code. You can use it, and here is also the latest pen testing report, right? So, stuff like that. So, in addition to we detonating some of these exploits to see what we can detect, we also sort of ensure that our own stuff is getting tested, right, with a third party partner. We don't want to do that ourselves. There is also a little bit of dogfooding there, honestly. I'll tell you. Elasticsearch had Log4j exposure initially. That was what was believed. And when we saw whether we use Elasticsearch, whether we ourselves are vulnerable to it, some of these things are very sort of educating, Steve. The whole attack path feature that you see in Threat Mapper really came because of that. We knew we have Elasticsearch, but we were not sure whether that log4j.jar was loaded in memory by Elasticsearch. If it is not loaded, I'm not going to go and fix it, myself. Stuff like that, right? So it's a mix of things. But to answer your question, three parts, right? One is yes, dog fooding. The second one is detonating all of this stuff that you see, seeing how we detect, enhancing it, mapping it to TTPs. Some of these things don't really fall into standard sort of TTPs. People are using Gmail and Twitter as command and control, right? So it's a slightly different sort of a workflow. But yes, and then the third thing is, of course, having our own pen test team to sort of look at our own stuff. Yep.
That's really great. I think that we've covered all my questions. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today and going deep on Deepfence.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I hope this was helpful. I wanted to unpack some of the tech, and I couldn't think of any other sort of forum to do that. So thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about some of the tech. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. If you liked the episode today and would like to help support us, please hit subscribe, drop us a review, or share it with your friends. Thanks.